American attacks on Iran have only just begun. That's according to the U.S. Defense Secretary, as we learn Canadian troops could soon help our Gulf allies. The looming question, is this for the long haul? I'm Jackson Proskow. The West Block starts right now.
One can never categorically rule out participation.
As the U.S. and Israel continue to pound Iran, Iran is hitting neighboring countries that host American forces. We'll speak with the former U.S. intelligence officer and foreign fighter analyst at CENTCOM in a few minutes. And trade talks here in D.C. have started back up. U.S.-Canada Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc met with Washington's trade representative after the Prime Minister said this in Australia.
Great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons.
We'll speak with a Canadian trade expert in Washington on what comes next on North American trade, coming up. In the U.S. Capitol behind me, many September 11th era veterans are now serving in Congress, and they see the Iranian conflict potentially echoing the long wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Iraq War ran from 2003 to 2011. The war in Afghanistan was the longest in U.S. history, spanning 20 years from 2001 to 2021. Canadians fought alongside American troops in that war, but the Prime Minister has shut down that idea for Iran. Mark Carney called the widening Iran war a failure of the international order.
Before there can be a ceasefire, there needs to be a de-escalation of hostilities. Right now we have a spreading of hostilities.
But the Prime Minister later did not rule out Canada helping its Gulf allies if needed.
We will stand by our allies when it makes sense. There's a distinction between the offensive actions that were taken and are being taken by the United States and Israel, that were taken by them without consultation with Canada, with other allies, and we're not party to those actions. But we will always defend Canadians. We will always stand by and defend our allies when called upon.
Gulf states include Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the UAE, normally known for glossy towers and beautiful architecture. But Iranian strikes on Bahrain, Dubai, and oil tankers in the region.
From now on, all navigating through the Strait of Hormuz is forbidden.
Also equal hitting the Gulf's economic lifelines, meaning Tehran could be pushing those states closer to Washington, and the possibility of Gulf states opening their skies and territory to military operations. But fighting Iran isn't easy or cheap. American strikes in the first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury cost nearly $4 billion U.S. And further battles with a large country spiked with mountainous terrain won't be simple. So the U.S. is hoping to enlist the help of Kurds in the region, which might pose a challenge of its own. The world's largest stateless ethnic group has been let down before by 4 different U.S. presidents in 4 different battles. We Kurds will not allow our national struggle to be hijacked by another country's war, says this Kurdish writer. We've learned our lesson, and we would want certain guarantees from the Americans. Michael Pregent knows that history well. He spent decades as an intelligence officer, including at U.S. CENTCOM, and worked against Iranian influence in Iraq. Michael, thanks so much for joining us. One of the early impressions we're getting here is that the U.S. is really hoping that they can facilitate regime change or some sort of uprising within Iran. Do you think that's possible without putting troops on the ground?
Thanks for having me. I think it's possible because I think this is one of the first times that we've actually been invited in to a conflict by the population. The population, 70%, are against the regime. They've actually been asking the president, why did it take you so long to start these airstrikes? So there's an opportunity. What we're trying to do right now is degrade the IRGC's capabilities, the regime's capabilities, to retake control and open a window for the population to actually take back their country.
You worked in Iraq countering Iranian influence. How would you assess the current situation on the ground in Iran right now? What is this moment like?
Well, the regime has never faced anything like this before. The regime leadership has been degraded to a point where you're down to the 5th and 6th, 7th string commanders, right? And as far as their military capabilities, those are the easy targets in any war. The first 10 days of being able to target static positions, being able to target Missile launchers, any regime formations, that's the easy part of war. I hate to say it that way. What gets hard is when they take their uniforms off and go into the civilian population, like we saw in Iraq, when they start blending in, and it's hard to differentiate between curiosity and hostile intent sometimes, because we're used to dealing with a uniformed force when we're being trained on how to go to war. But in our experience since 9/11, it's been an insurgency. So what happens if we do the same thing we did in Iraq, where we tell anybody who's part of the Revolutionary Guard, you can no longer be part of Iran's future, and they just go into the insurgency? That would be a mistake, and hopefully we've learned from that. We have signs that there have been defections, that there are leaders inside of the IRGC that are willing to work with the U.S. and Israel, but they need to be vetted by people on the ground. We don't do a good job of vetting, unfortunately. And we need to have that vetting process take place from the people on the ground.
President Trump has said that he must personally be involved in picking whoever the new leaders are in Iran. He's also told CNN that he thinks that this will be just like Venezuela. Is it that simple?
No, it's not that simple. It's not at all. The regime is set up to survive. They have many people that could replace the supreme leader. Nobody wants the job right now. I think that's the good thing, is that whoever gets the job is immediately going to be a target, is immediately going to be designated a terrorist leader. The president we should have a say in who the next leader is, but along with the Iranian people, right? The Iranian people need to tell President Trump, this is who we want. But right now we have people telling President Trump, they want me if you're Pahlavi, or they want me if you're the MEK. And it needs to come from the people on the ground, the people that have skin in the game. The best leader that can emerge in a post-regime Iran is somebody we don't even know about right now, that is fighting in this process, that is willing to take on the regime as we continue to set the conditions and open that time and space for that to happen.
But we're in this space right now where the regime change hasn't happened. There hasn't been the uprising yet. Right. What is the greatest risk that could come out of Iran right now, even though there's all this talk that, their missile capability has been greatly degraded and their air defenses are largely gone?
The biggest risk could be that the president stops the campaign right now, in my opinion. If he just stops it, like he did back in June, that would mean that we really didn't give the time and space for the people to change out the regime. The people will feel betrayed on the ground. That's something we're used to. We betrayed the Kurds in Iraq and Syria. We have so many recent examples of betrayal with allies as we acquiesce and make concessions for our adversaries. So the biggest risk is that the president stops at this point. We need to create that space. And if it doesn't develop, if the population doesn't rise up, we can't force regime change. We can say, hey, we gave you the window to do it. You chose not to do it. But we did degrade Iran's ability to attack its neighbors, to threaten Israel, and to pursue a nuclear weapon.
At this point, how long do you think U.S. allies in the Gulf are willing to tolerate the disruption that this war is causing, not only to their economies, but their societies?
Yeah, so our allies in the region, we're going to be able to assess them after this. Like, what did they do? What bases could we use? What bases were we not able to use? I want to look at the Al Udeid base in Qatar and make the argument that we probably don't need that there. Look at the other allies that are stepping up. It's going to be an opportunity for the U.S. to see what's necessary in these countries. A lot of people don't know that we weren't able to use the base in Iraq to defend Israel against Iran's missiles. We weren't able to use the base in Al Udeid in Qatar to do the same. We weren't able to use Incirlik in Turkey. So we keep having to project force from carrier groups, from other places, to do things, and you wonder why we have these U.S. bases there. I would say that the biggest pressure they're going to be able to put on the Trump administration is the energy issue with oil and gas, the Strait of Hormuz, the Gulf of Aden. There are problems there, but again, there are bypasses. This helps Russia in the short term. It hurts China in the long term. This helps the United States in the long term when it comes to oil and gas production, but that's the biggest pressure that the president will probably get from our Sunni regional allies. But they are nice to haves, not need to haves. I would say it like that.
Yeah, overall, what do you think the biggest pressure is going to be on the sustainability of this campaign? Is it oil? Is it supplies of interceptor missiles?
Well, see, the missiles are always a big deal, right? We know that Iran can overwhelm our defenses with cheap drones. And everybody knows about the Shahed drone now, and I don't even want to say it because everyone's an expert now on the Shahed 136. But It's that ability. They produced 100 a day. You know, they're $10,000 to $35,000 a piece, and it's as simple as having a heavy machine gun, listening for a lawnmower and shooting it down. But we don't have that capability across this space. We've relied on Patriot systems and other systems to shoot these things down, and the cost ratio is just not worth it. But yes, you saw some of the cluster bomb munitions used over Israel. That's very concerning, because those are last-ditch efforts. What will Iran do if it feels it has no other options? Will we see the use of a hypersonic missile against a U.S. destroyer? Will we see the use of a hypersonic missile against, Israel? What else do they have in store? And I think they're getting to a point where, they have that red line where they start using some of these systems that exist maybe, or don't exist, but we've heard about. We need to worry about hypersonic weapons that Russia supposedly gave Iran. We need to worry about activating terrorist cells here in the United States and other places.
So as you watch the first week of this campaign unfold, what's your big takeaway?
The intelligence is spot on. To be able to have intel on the supreme leader's position, to be able to see the defense minister move to that position, the head of the IRGC move to that position in real time, have sources on the ground confirm it, have our signals intelligence capabilities confirm it, have our imagery confirm it, and then at the same time, within seconds, have U.S. fighter jets, Israeli fighter jets and U.S. cruise missiles simultaneously hit a target that was based on intelligence delivered minutes earlier. That's huge. Again, the first 10 days of a war, you expect this type of devastation. We did the same thing in Iraq. We decimated Saddam Hussein's military, and then they went into the insurgency. In Afghanistan, we hit every Taliban Al-Qaeda target we could hit, but then they fell into the insurgency, right? And same thing with Syria. Israel just hit a bunch of systems inside of Syria, but the jihadist network in Syria is still alive. So that's always a problem. So far so good, because everything is a classic military target list. This is where it gets trickier, when everybody goes to civilian clothes and moves into mosques, schools, and other places to make that very restrictive target environment.
How long should this go on?
It should go on until the people have signaled that they want regime change, or they don't. When they say they don't, you just continue to degrade their military capability, and you call it a successful exercise.
If they don't, do you think that the U.S. can work with whoever steps into the leadership role?
Whoever steps into the leadership role is going to be weakened. The nuclear program is going to be under watch all the time, not by the IAEA, but by U.S. intelligence, Israeli Air Force, U.S. Air Force. Anytime we see an air defense capability being built up on one of these nuclear sites, it's going to be hit. Anytime we see vehicles going to those places to try to reestablish that nuclear capability, they're going to be hit. So we can work with a weakened regime that can no longer threaten its neighbors and no longer, has this death to America, death to Israel opening every meeting. And we may even say, that's just rhetoric. They can still say that. But if we see any indicators of that, we're likely going to hit it. Well, I don't do hope, right? Hope is for your family, your football team, and your friends. So I don't hope there's regime change, but I want the people to have hope that they can actually change out their government if we provide the time and space for them to do that.
Michael, thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.